Folks, it's 5 minutes past 7 o'clock, and we need to continue our understanding of what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago's politics. Well, in his Labor Day statement, the political leader of the Movement for Social Justice, David Abdulah, called for a revolution of the mind. A revolution of the mind. He said the two pillars needed to solve the everyday problems of workers are a progressive trade union movement and a progressive political party representing the interests of workers. So what's the state of the current labour environment, especially in light of the economic climate? Mr. Abdullah is our guest this morning. Sir, welcome to Morning Edition.
Thanks, Aidan. Good to be here.
Good to have you here. You know, it's an opportune time. The country just celebrated Labour Day, albeit a rainy day, but nonetheless, it was an important commemoration of the advances made in terms of workers' rights in this country. When you look at the economic climate, are you not getting the impression that the burden of adjustment, in spite of the calls by the labour movement, that the burden of adjustment is in fact resting squarely on the shoulders of workers?
It is, and this is of major concern. I mean, workers have lost their jobs. Several thousand workers have lost their jobs already. Incomes, in many cases, have been frozen, either by employers that don't have a collective agreement, or in the case of many workers in the state sector, the employer just is not settling negotiations.
Yeah.
So it therefore means that inflation has eroded the real earning power of tens of thousands of working people in this country. More than that, hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, but you know, the thing is, in spite of these challenges, the existing labour unions represent less than half of the labour force.
25%.
In this country.
Yeah.
Why is that?
The process of getting recognition is extremely painful, very, very tedious, very problematic. I was General Secretary of the Union, as you know, and I was just looking at some data yesterday, actually. We have recognition claims that were made in 2010, 2016. Those workers have not, the union has not yet gotten recognition for those workers because the process needs to be simplified. What happens is that you have to get 50% plus one of all the workers. They have to be paying dues for 8 consecutive weeks together. So if you have, for example, a chain store, a supermarket chain store, a fast food chain and so on, it means you have to go to each location and then try to get those workers to sign up, get 50% plus one, paying dues together. If during that period the employer sends home some of those people that you have signed up, you lose your 50% plus one. It's very, very difficult and complicated. And then they check the books. Lawyers are now getting involved. You see about lawyers. Employers are hiring lawyers to challenge the union's claims. Matters are going to the court. And so workers, in effect, are being denied to have the right to join a trade union of their choice.
When you consider that in this current administration, you have in the form of a former president of the PSA, Ms. Jennifer Baptiste Primus, as the Minister of Labour, are you in any way encouraged that she will have a more enlightened view of the need to reform labour legislation and in fact protect the rights of workers?
Well, it's not only having an enlightened view, because the previous 5 years there was someone who had a very enlightened view and did nothing. So far the current Minister of Labour has been proactive and is demonstrating that she's committed to making those changes. Of course, she's not the only one within Cabinet, and so the Labour movement has to continue to press the government to bring about the changes that are necessary. The reform of the Industrial Relations Act is absolutely essential to provide for the right of workers to join a trade union of their choice, and a number of other critical amendments that have to be made. So the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Within a year, if nothing has happened in terms of actual draft legislation coming to the Parliament, then the old talk would have, been just that, old talk.
Now, I don't know if you know, but the Attorney General published his legislative agenda, and I think he indicated that this was the first time this is ever done. Have you seen within that list of items, or have you had the opportunity to review it?
I did look at it online some time ago, and I don't remember all the details off the top of my head. I do think that there was reference to a number of pieces of labour legislation. I don't remember which period of the 5 years, because it was a 5-year rollout, which year he had scheduled that to come before the Parliament. And of course, we don't know what the amendments will be until they're presented, because you could have listed amendments in the Industrial Relations Act, and then the amendments that are brought are horrendous.
Yes,
right? So
yes.
that it's both scheduling it, making sure that it is stuck to the schedule, or maybe even brought in advance because it's urgent, and ensuring that the amendments are those that will advance the interests of workers.
When you look at the whole relationship between the labor movement and the worker of the 21st century, in the context of this volatile economic environment, do you think that workers, in their own interest, ought to seek out labor union representation, and in that context work together in a more cohesive fashion to gain recognition for union representation?
Agreed, but there are a lot of workers are very scared because they're in insecure employment. They have short-term contracts sometimes. Even in the public sector, you have people on month-to-month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year contracts. A lot of people, particularly young people, and that's another very unfortunate situation where a lot of young people now can't build a future in this country because they keep being employed on very short-term contracts. They can't go to a financial institution to get a mortgage for a home, and so on. So a lot of workers feel very insecure, and therefore think that if they go to a trade union, they will be in a position to be easily victimized by the employer. So that's one of the things that we need to have changed as well, shift away from this culture of short-term employment. But if the process of recognition is much easier and simpler, then workers would find it much more comfortable to come to trade unions. They wouldn't feel, well, if I go to a trade union, we have to wait 3, 4, 5 years. And I could cite instances where companies sent home workers where the process of recognition was protracted.
Yes. Now let's be real about this whole situation. In Trinidad and Tobago, we are facing dire economic circumstances. The government has a major challenge in bridging its fiscal deficit. That may very well mean significant reductions in expenditure. I read last night, I think this company, GGI, it's a construction company, I think they do alu zinc and roofing materials, that they have gone into receivership, and that has also affected a certain number of workers. Are workers adequately prepared for what is to come over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, being adequately prepared, of course, suggests that some workers have the ability to put some covering for the rainy day, which means that they have savings or they have other resources. But the reality is hidden. I mean, the last poverty data, we don't know how accurate it is in terms of absolute terms, but the last poverty data suggested that 15-17% of the population is living below the poverty line. Now that translates into close to 200,000 people. There are a lot of people who are working poor, who are working for just enough money to get to work today, get home in the evening, have a little bit of something to eat during the day,
and repeat the process
the next day, right? And I would think that another several 100,000 people are in that category. So in truth and in fact, a lot of workers don't have any leeway to put aside for the rainy day, to make adjustments. And that is why the burden of adjustment can be placed on them. The burden of adjustment has to be placed on others. So that, for example, in terms of the government's fiscal situation, the tax regime needs to be changed. We need to tax the wealthy more. In other words, now is the time when they who have the ability to make a greater sacrifice have to make a contribution to the national well-being.
But they also have the ability to engage in tax avoidance, which is a very legal process. I mean, I'm not talking about tax evasion. I'm not casting any aspersions.
But there's also tax evasion as well.
Well, I suppose that, yes. I mean, but I was strictly dealing with the fact that these very people will have the capacity to engage in tax avoidance. I mean, they have all kinds of ways and means to reduce their taxable liability,
including multinationals with transfer pricing,
exactly,
and so on, and large corporations that can offset losses in one against profits in the other.
And we are in dire need of this higher levels of foreign direct investment, particularly in the energy sector. We're looking for greater levels of diversification in the non-energy sector.
Yes.
So then we need to have an attractive tax regime, etc. So it's a trade-off.
Well, yes, but I mean, one of the things that foreign companies recognize is that if they think you're in a weak position, they'll put you over the barrel to extract their pound of flesh. And really and truly, at the end of the day, as we have had the experience with the whole tax, remember the 10-year tax holidays? And
for LNG?
Well, LNG, but that was a more recent one. But there have been, over the years, the Pioneer Industries Act, way back in the 60s, industrialization by invitation. Companies got 10-year tax holidays. And at the end of the 10 years, they closed shop and went to St. Lucia and repeated the process.
We've had free zones?
Yes. So those experiences ought to tell us that we ought not to negotiate with these multinationals from a position of weakness. We ought to ensure that they don't get a pound of flesh and we get nothing at all. All they will do, therefore, is exploit relatively cheap labor, relatively cheap electricity, access to other facilities, and so on. And when they have sucked the orange dry, dust their pants like ArcelorMittal did and go somewhere else. So, no, I think we have to focus on getting a vision in Trinidad and Tobago of building this country, of saying to local businesses and the elites in the society that they have a responsibility now to step up to the plate and contribute more by way of taxes to the development of the country. The government now has to ensure that money spent is money well spent and not wasted or stolen and so on. So we have to change the arrangements for public procurement and a whole series of things like that to get that right.
So are you proposing then that within the private sector, the marginal tax rate on profits ought to move from 25% to what?
It could go to 40%, 30, 40%. But we would then, not on every business. Small businesses, no, because they too are very tight in terms of their cash flow and so on. Larger businesses, when one could say over a certain size, you then have a higher tax rate and you could have more than one category. And then say to those private sector firms, if you earn new foreign exchange, or if you engage in investment that will save the country having to expend foreign exchange, if you create new jobs that are sustainable and so on, if you invest in research and development, you can then get a tax credit to bring your tax rate back down.
Right.
Because sometimes you have to incentivize people to make the transformation in terms of their culture of business.
And I'm glad you raised that issue because, of course, it introduces important incentives, but it also may complicate the tax administration. What's your position in terms of the reform of the tax collecting agency, the Board of Inland Revenue? Is the Revenue Authority arrangement an improvement on that administration of tax?
The model that had been brought by the Manning government was not a model that we agreed with for several reasons. One, it said that all the workers in BIR customs had to essentially sever their relationship with the public service and then apply afresh for a job and so on. So that was a problem. The second thing was the structure. It seemed to have been very much almost a entity unto itself as a private, almost like a parastatal.
Right.
And you really did not want to put the entire power of revenue collection for the state in the hands of what appeared to be a parastatal. So I think that's a problem. I'm sure that there are reforms that could take place within the existing arrangements of BIR and customs and so on to increase the capacity of revenue collection. And that ought to be done with a matter of great urgency.
Right, but in the context, though, of where we are as far as trying to deal with these financial issues faced by the government, shouldn't that be a priority at this time?
Yes, and we made that point. MSG had a press conference some time ago and was making the point that the option of going to the Heritage and Stabilization Fund was one option, but the option of trying to maximize the revenue that is to be paid, that is supposed to be paid by taxpayers, that option does not seem to have been exercised, and that is a great priority. And hopefully one would hear something coming from the Minister of Finance in the lead up to Budget 2016-17.
Yes,
because it doesn't make sense to have a situation where you are cutting expenditure, sending people home, and there are other people in the country who are not paying the taxes they're supposed to be paying.
Yes, equity.
That is totally unjust and unfair.
When you consider the challenges that this country faced with regard to the CLICO debacle, it is estimated, and I say this very liberally, the use of the word, $25 billion of taxpayers' money was utilized over a period of time to stabilize the situation, to refund policyholders, and so on. 100 million this morning revealed in the Daily Express spent on this commission of inquiry. Yet no one is before the courts. $25 billion of our national patrimony has been utilized to stabilize this situation and, of course, protect our other institutions across the financial sector and elsewhere within the economy. And yet we are not witnessing anybody climbing the steps of the hall of justice.
Yes, and it's not only CLICO. I mean, CLICO and HCU, of course, was big, but the examples of alleged corruption that's come out of white-collar crime and so on, which is not just government officials, it's private sector, because there's not only the person who takes the bribe, it's the person who gave the bribe, right, is involved. So we don't have I think it starts with the political will to address that situation. Clearly, there are mechanisms to do it, because Ramesh Maharaj, to his credit, he was Attorney General within a government, initiated the whole Piaco investigation,
inquiry,
which did lead to people being charged and people being jailed in the United States and the investigation started here. So it is possible, if you have the political will, there are mechanisms that can be set up and so on. But it comes down to the issue of whether people are prepared to challenge the status quo. That's why I talked about the revolution of the mind. We in the society tend to, many people, take the line of least resistance. We are comfortable, and the elites in the society are comfortable.
But that makes us complicit in our own demise.
Yes.
You talked about the Second Republic.
Yes.
The Second Republic will entail what? An entire change in the Constitution and an entire restructuring of the economy.
Yeah.
How realistic
is that?
Yes.
Well, it is realistic in the sense that, first of all, the ideas that we've put forward for it, I think, are possible and realistic. They're workable. But two things. One is that if we don't go the route of the Second Republic, then what we are saying is that we're prepared to live with the society that we now have.
We like it so?
Yeah. And we're going to continue to degenerate. So it's not a matter that the degeneration will somehow stop. It will get worse and worse. The sense of lack of humanity, for example, in terms of the murders, the crisis of the education system that is failing our young people.
If I were to ask you a yes or no question, do you get the impression that this current administration has the courage to engage in this kind of transformation? Yes or no?
No.
We're going to talk about this a little more. Folks, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we want to talk a bit about tertiary education, so stay with us.